Throughout history, countless species have vanished from the face of the earth, with extinction rates today being 10,000 times faster than normal rates. In this video, we'll explore the haunting last photos of 9 extinct animals from around the world. The year is 1964, and after exploring the remote corners of the Monteverde cloud forest of northern Costa Rica, a group of scientists stumbled upon something truly extraordinary. Gathered along the edges of rain-filled pools were countless bright orange toads, creatures unlike any they had ever seen before. These toads, discovered in 1964, were named golden toads after their bright orange hue. That immediately distinguished them from other species of toad, whereas the females looked much different. For most of the year, these toads remained hidden, deep beneath layers of leaf litter. The golden toads were confined to a mere 8 square kilometers, within a tiny patch of forest. Every year in late March, the arrival of the rain set off a chaotic event, where toads emerged from their hidden burrows and congregated at the breeding pools which had just filled up. At these pools, males far outnumbered the females, leading to a breeding frenzy, as each toad competed for a chance to pass on its genes. The golden toad thrived in its unique habitat, with a population in the thousands. But by 1987, something began to change. Their numbers plummeted, seemingly overnight. Despite the expansion of the nature reserve, the toads continued to vanish. By 1988, only a dozen remained, and on the 15th of May 1989, the golden toad was seen for the last time. This sudden disappearance remains one of the most haunting extinctions in history. Unlike other species that slowly faded over time, the golden toad vanished almost immediately, within the confines of a protected area, far from human reach. So what happened? Scientists initially pointed to a severe drought that struck in 1987 and 1988. It was hoped that the toads were simply waiting out the drought, but when the rains returned, they did not. Nowadays, a far more sinister culprit is suspected, the deadly fungus Chytridiomycosis. This disease has decimated hundreds of amphibian species worldwide, thriving in cool and wet environments, the exact conditions of the cloud forest that the golden toad called home. Though chytrid wasn't identified until years later, historical data allows us to trace its spread. The earliest record in the region comes from a salamander found in southern Mexico in 1971. From this initial arrival, chytrid spread fast, as it spread through Central America, wiping out 50 species along its path, reaching Costa Rica in the late 1980s, coinciding with the disappearance of the golden toad. This photo, taken on a rainy afternoon in 1987, is the last known image of the golden toad, an animal that vanished from the world almost as quickly as it was discovered. If you were to venture to the rugged terrain of the Atlas Mountains a few centuries ago, you might encounter some dangerous animals like brown bears and leopards. But perhaps the most feared animal in this region was the Barbary lion, a subspecies of lion that once roamed the lands along the northern edge of Africa, from Morocco to Egypt, where they became icons of some of the most notorious civilizations in history, like ancient Greece, Egypt, and the Roman Empire. Historically, Barbary lions were distinguished by their long and dark manes, and hunters have long claimed that Barbary lions were the largest kind of lion, at around 2.8 meters, but evidence since then has hinted that they were no larger than any other kind of lion. Over time, its prey including deer and gazelles became scarce, and so the lion had to eat livestock, which put them into direct conflict with people, resulting in more lions being killed. Looking at the fossil record, the oldest remains come from a cave in Morocco from 100,000 years ago, meaning that they had reached the region before the expansion of the Sahara Desert 80,000 years ago, which has isolated them to the present day. New technologies have suggested that the Barbary lion may have not even been a unique subspecies after all, and actually formed into the same lineage as the Asiatic lion, as well as populations from West and Central Africa. This lineage originated sometime around 118,000 years ago in Eastern Africa, before spreading north and west. DNA research has identified a unique genetic marker in Barbary lions, however. This iconic photo was taken in 1925, and was the last ever photo of the Barbary lion. The Baiji was a unique species of dolphin that once lived in the Yangtze River. This dolphin was not closely related to any other species, having diverged from the ancestors of the Amazon River dolphin over 16 million years ago. The Baiji faced a genetic bottleneck around 10,000 years ago. As the last glaciation ended, sea levels rose rapidly, flooding much of the Yangtze River's freshwater habitats. This drastic change nearly wiped out the Baiji, reducing their population to around 300. However, their numbers rebounded, reaching between 15,000 and 50,000 by 1,000 years ago. Fast forward to the 1950s, the Baiji population was estimated at 6,000, and by 1980, that number had plummeted to just 400, and by 1997, only 13 were believed to remain. The last confirmed sighting of a Baiji was in 2002, though a grainy video from 2004 might show one. It's impossible to say for sure. The decline of the Baiji was driven by several factors. During the Great Leap Forward starting in 1958, the Baiji was hunted in large numbers, as traditional beliefs about protecting the dolphin were lost. Other threats included entanglement in fishing gear, electric fishing, collision with boats. The Baiji was nearly blind, and the noise pollution made it impossible to navigate safely. Habitat loss and pollution. But the final blow came in 1997 with the construction of the Three Gorges Dam. This massive barrier blocked its migration routes, restricted water flow, and decimated the fish that they relied on for food, pushing the species towards extinction. Despite China's efforts to protect the Baiji, including establishing reserves and conservation programs, these measures came too late, and the last known Baiji in captivity died in 2002. Becoming the first cetacean species to be driven extinct by human activity. There have been unconfirmed sightings since 2004, like in May of this year, when 2 finned animals were filmed in the Yangtze River. However, these sightings remain uncertain, but there is still a chance that it could be out there. The last confirmed photo of the Baiji was taken in 2002, of the final individual in captivity, marking the end of an ancient lineage that once swam freely in the Yangtze River. Imagine a creature so unique, it redefined what we know about the animal kingdom. A frog that gave birth through its mouth. Not just one, but 2 of these extraordinary frogs once existed. The southern gastric brooding frog discovered in 1972, and the northern gastric brooding frog discovered in 1984, which inhabited the fast-moving creeks of Australia's rainforest, rarely straying more than a few meters from the water's edge. These frogs were like no other. Whilst most amphibians lay their eggs in water, letting them develop into tadpoles, and some even hatch as froglets, the gastric brooding frog took a path that almost seems like science fiction. The female frog would swallow around 40 eggs. Now you might think this would spell disaster, as the strong acids in the stomach would typically dissolve anything that touches them. But these eggs produced a substance that temporarily stopped acid production in their stomach, turning them into a safe nursery for the tadpoles, until one by one, the young froglets would climb out and into the water. However, if the mother frog was disturbed during this time, she would regurgitate all of her offspring at once, protecting them from threats. These frogs were already rare when they were discovered, their populations confined to a handful of secluded creeks, making them vulnerable to the deadly chytrid fungus. The last southern gastric brooding frog died in 1981, with the final one in captivity dying in 1983. The northern species, however, was last seen the same year it was discovered in 1984. This final photograph was taken just before it disappeared, leaving us with nothing but the haunting question of what other undiscovered species may have been lost forever as this fungus hit Australia's forests. Up in the remote reaches of the Torres Strait, a tiny rodent known as the Bramble Cay Melomys lived on the brink of survival. The Melomys are a group of rodents native to northern Australia, New Guinea, and the scattered islands in between. Genetic analysis has revealed that its closest living relative was the Cape York Melomys, found on the Cape York Peninsula of northern Australia, not too far from the island. Remarkably, the Bramble Cay Melomys was larger than its mainland cousin, an example of island gigantism. How these small creatures arrived on Bramble Cay remains a mystery. They may have floated across on driftwood, or walked when sea levels were lower, and clung on to Bramble Cay when sea levels rose. In 1978, the population was thriving, with reports of hundreds of them scurrying about. But by 1988, that number had dwindled to just 90. Still, this was considered normal for an animal confined to such a small area, but the situation quickly worsened. In 2002, only 10 were found. By 2008, plans were in motion to save the species, but despite this effort, the Bramble Cay Melomys was last seen in 2009. In 2014, scientists made a desperate attempt to capture any remaining Melomyses, even if it meant destroying their habitat. But delays pushed the mission to 2015, and by then it was too late. The Bramble Cay Melomys was gone. It's likely that the Bramble Cay Melomys was the first mammal to go extinct due to human-induced climate change. Rising sea levels and intensified storms, consequences of our changing climate, destroyed the vegetation the Melomys depended on, and may have directly wiped out the last of this once common species. There is a hope that the population might still live on, near the Fly River estuary, but this is only a possibility if the species evolved before reaching the island, which is considered unlikely. The Pinta Island tortoise was one of 15 species of giant tortoises that called the Galapagos home. These massive creatures once roamed nearly every archipelago in the world, with just the Aldabra and the Galapagos tortoises clinging on today. The Pinta Island tortoise's future was already in danger when it was discovered in 1877. Decades of hunting by whalers, who valued the tortoises as a source of meat, had driven them to the edge of extinction. By the 1950s, it was believed that the species had vanished entirely. Then, against all odds, a single male was discovered in 1971. He was named Lonesome George, and his discovery sparked a new wave of hope among conservationists. Recognizing the importance of George's survival, efforts were made to breed him with closely related species. Despite years of attempts, the breeding program failed. Searches for other members of his species also turned up empty, leaving Lonesome George as the last known Pinta Island tortoise, until his death in June 2012, at an estimated age of over 100 years. With his death, the species was declared extinct. However, there remains a glimmer of hope. 17 first-generation hybrids were discovered. With advances in genetic technology, there is a possibility that one day, the Pinta Island tortoise might walk the earth again. If you traveled to the Hawaiian archipelago a century ago, you would have been greeted by a diverse chorus of bird life, far richer than what remains today. Among the songs you might have heard was the haunting call of the Kauai Oo, a hollow flute-like call that echoed through the forested canyons where it lived, nesting in tree cavities high above the ground. Easily recognized by its yellow eyes and a curved bill perfectly adapted to reaching nectar. Even on the remote island of Kauai, it faced many threats. The first came with the arrival of humans, who brought invasive mammals that wreaked havoc on the native bird populations. But as a tree dweller, it managed to survive. But the second threat was even more deadly: avian malaria, a mosquito-borne disease that arrived in Hawaii in the 1940s. Unlike birds in other parts of the world, those in Hawaii had no immunity to it, and the impact was devastating. 95 of Hawaii's bird species were wiped out. The Kauai Oo retreated to the high elevation forest where mosquitoes couldn't reach. But these highlands lacked the nesting cavities the birds needed to nest, dooming it to a slow, inevitable decline. By the 1960s, only 34 individuals remained, their numbers dwindling with each passing year. Then in 1982, a powerful hurricane tore through Hawaii, killing the last remaining females and destroying the few remaining nest sites. By 1985, just one male was left, photographed for the last time that same year. His song was heard once more in 1987, but his call remained unanswered. With the Kauai Oo's extinction, the world didn't just lose a single species, but the whole Mohoidae family, the first bird family to vanish in over 500 years. In the treetops in the forest above El Valle de Anton in Panama, dwelled Rabbs fringe-limbed tree frog. These frogs were large by tree frog standards, living high in the treetops where they had evolved unique adaptations for life in the canopy. With their webbed hands and feet, they could gracefully glide between the trees, steering their descent with long, powerful limbs. But it wasn't just their gliding ability that made them special. Once the tadpoles had hatched in tiny water-filled tree holes, the male frogs did something extraordinary. They stayed behind to protect their young from predators, and even more astonishingly, they sacrificed their own skin cells, allowing the tadpoles to feed on it. A behavior so strange, it has only ever been documented in the Rabbs fringe-limbed tree frog. Unfortunately today, it is extinct. Sadly, like many amphibians around the world, Rabbs fringe-limbed tree frog face the threat of the chytrid fungus. And yeah, I know I've mentioned it 2 times already, but it's really that bad. Being discovered only in 2005, they were discovered just as the fungus hit central Panama. And so, recognizing the imminent threat, conservationists quickly brought some of these frogs into captivity at a local conservation center and the Atlanta Zoo. Whilst these frogs thrived in captivity, none of their tadpoles ever made it to froglets. And one by one, the remaining frogs started to die off, with the last female dying in 2009, leaving just 2 males, one of whom died in 2012. In 2014, he was recorded calling, the first time he had made his mating call since 2005. But with no females left, his call went unanswered. He was photographed for the last time in the documentary Racing Extinction, before his death in 2016. If you were to travel back in time 200 years ago to southern Africa, you would likely encounter many familiar animals, like rhinos, lions, elephants, and leopards, but also a less familiar animal, the quagga. The quagga was the first animal to have its DNA analysed, all the way back in 1984. And before this study, it wasn't really known what it was, appearing to be a blend of a horse and a zebra. Its DNA, however, showed that it was a zebra, more specifically a subspecies of the plain zebra, despite how different they look. This change in appearance happened relatively rapidly, when the zebras living south of the Orange River, separating from those north of the river 200,000 years ago. The quagga's coat, a blend of a horse and a zebra, set it apart from other subspecies. While zebra's stripes help deter predators and flies by creating a confusing visual effect in herds, the quagga's cold, dry habitat had fewer insects, making these adaptations unnecessary. Living further south than any other zebra, it had evolved one very important adaptation for the greater seasonality: a thicker coat that would molt in winter. Since the beginning of recorded history, the quagga has been hunted for its skin and meat, and it became increasingly rare in the 1800s, when it was mercilessly hunted by Dutch and British colonists, and its population continued to shrink until a cold summer's morning in 1878, when it was seen for the last time. This photo you are looking at is the last ever photo of the quagga, taken at London Zoo in 1870. In fact, this was the only ever quagga to be photographed alive. The ivory-billed woodpecker was last photographed in 1944, but many believe it to live on. So go and watch this video to find out more.